Donovan Moodley's bid for parole has been denied again. The convicted killer has been serving a life sentence for the 2004 kidnapping and murder of Leigh Matthews. She was 21 at the time. Yesterday's hearing was his second after his initial attempt was denied back in 2022. Let's get some reaction now from the family, and we're joined by Leigh's father, Rob Matthews. Mr. Matthews, thank you very much for your time and for availing yourself. Obviously, welcoming the decision by Correctional Services and the Minister?
Well, I think the decision still has to go to the Minister, so there's still a process ahead, but the indications are such that the recommendation would be that it's going to be denied, but the Minister makes a decision at the end of the day. Are you hoping
he upholds Are you hoping he upholds the recommendation by the board?
Certainly. We truly don't believe that he's entitled to parole at this stage. We found still the same Donovan Moodley, a consummate liar, a different version of how Leigh's body was handled. And so there's still so many questions unanswered. So at face value, there really is somebody that brings huge credibility, but you need to look behind that veneer. So remember, that's how he perpetrated his crime, by convincing us that we needed to pay a bribe, or not a bribe,
he extorted, because he had kidnapped her.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost it. Yeah. So it's a difficult process that goes ahead, and I think that it would really be a tragedy if the Minister lets him out, but he will make that decision. He'll base it on the information that he gets from all the different players. And kidnapping can't be condoned in the country, nor can gender-based violence, quite frankly. It's a scourge, and just because there's a technical period when parole could be made available, it's not guaranteed. It's not a right. I think victims have rights, and society has a right to know that justice is going to be served. So, we're very hopeful, and we trust that the system will prevail.
Tell me about what this does to you and your family psychologically. I mean, just last year you had to go through the same process, and now it's about 12, 13 months later, the process is restarted again. What does it do to your family psychologically?
No, it's wrenching. It's absolutely draining. It's wrenching, and it's not what we wanted. But that's what it is. And so we determined to make sure that we play our role in seeing that justice is upheld. But it's tough for victims. It's really tough. And I'm not so sure that the process always understands the plight and the demands that it puts on us. And there's so many others. I mean, there's so many people that don't even know that the perpetrators are coming up for parole. So, how much more difficult is that? And people that can't even get to the parole hearings because they don't have the finance to get there. So there are lots of gaps in the system that need to be ironed out.
So you talk about the fact that during yesterday's hearing in the High Court, he had a different version. He said something about Leigh screaming, and that's what forced him to shoot her even after you had paid the ransom money that he asked for. Do you think, I think I'm counting about 5 or 6 versions now. Do you not believe that any of these are true? Do you think he still hasn't told you the full truth?
Okay, so just a correction, it wasn't in the High Court, it was at the parole board at...
yes, excuse me, yeah.
There's somewhere between 7 and 9 versions that we've counted, and, which one is the truth? We don't know, and each one has a permutation attached to it. So we are absolutely of the opinion, as was the judge, as are a number of other learned folk out there, that he did not do this by himself, but he persists to protect someone or some people out there. That can't be rehabilitation if you're not telling us the truth, firstly, as to how Leigh was killed, and secondly, who helped you. You can't have 7 to 9 versions, all variations. And this one we heard where he now says, she screamed and almost implying that he was defenseless. I mean, defenseless against a naked young lady, 21 years old. How can that be? How can you pull out a firearm and shoot her 4 times? That just makes no sense to anybody with half a brain.
And I know that you have a few questions that you'd like him to answer first before you even consider anything in terms of him applying for parole in future. And this includes the fact that as a family, you believe that there were other people involved who assisted him. You want to also know how Lee ended up where she ended up 10 days after he had killed her.
Yeah, we know where she ended up, where her body was found, and he tells us in the parole hearing yesterday that he purposefully put her body there so somebody could find her and then give us closure. Well, how bizarre is that? I mean, you take her from a place of hiding. We believe it was in a refrigerated area. Whether that was, I don't know, a morgue or a freezer, we don't know. But to take the body there and then carefully lay her body out without clothes on in a felt, hoping that somebody's going to find it, that is to give us closure. That is bizarre. That's bizarre.
How does it feel when you have to see him again, physically see him again?
I think it's more a problem for my wife. It makes her feel absolutely gut-wrenchingly nauseous. I just see absolute contempt from our side for that man. I just think that there are so many good people out there and so many perhaps criminals that really have been rehabilitated that actually do deserve an opportunity to enjoy parole in a different environment. But certainly not Mr. Moodley and not the Moodleys of this world.
Lastly, Mr. Matthews, I mean, I know that there's another family that is going to be going through what you went through yesterday. That is the Steenkamp family. Tomorrow, Oscar Pistorius, he'll be having the opportunity to try and convince the parole board to let him go. I just wonder what your advice would be from victim to victim in terms of, especially because both these cases were so highly publicized.
Look, it would be so presumptuous of me to try and give advice. The only part that we truly believe is that we needed to be present so that we could tell our side of the story. If you're not present there as a victim, the parole board's only hearing one side. So you really have to be there. But I think there's another point that is important, that there's not a desperate race, or there should not be a desperate race to pass parole. There's still a point of sentencing that needs to satisfy a community to say that it's not okay to commit these crimes. So you can't get let's say, for example, a life sentence in Moodley's case and hope to be out in less than 20 years on parole. That's not okay. And in my opinion, it's the same with Pistorius. It can't be okay to give him parole just because parole is an option. No. We need to make sure that he's paid for the crime as well, in terms of what society expects.
And your message to the system as well? I mean, you're saying that it cannot be correct that parole is rushed, etc. What would be your message to the system in terms of the fact that they want to always grant these parolees a right to, sort of convince them?
I think that my message to the system is, please, make it equal in terms of representation. Remember, the victims didn't choose. We didn't choose to be victims. The perpetrators chose their path of destruction and the consequences of what they need to live with. It's really difficult for victims to keep on coming up and be faced with this. Give us time to also make peace with the fact that the perpetrator of the crime actually serves a sentence that is appropriate. Parole for me should be to a very limited, deserving number of people out there. It shouldn't be broad-based. It should be so tightly controlled. Make sure that we actually do believe that the system works for victims as well, and give us victims a better voice than perhaps what we have at the moment.
Mr. Matthews, I mean, I know you tell me about 8 or 9 versions that Mr. Moodley has given since your daughter's passing. How did he seem to you yesterday, his demeanor? Did he, look at you at all, try to apologize for his actions, or, are you still sticking to the fact that he's just the same person he was those years ago, and at some point trying to say he had nothing to do with it?
Okay, so that's a real good question. I think he's more than the person he was before. He certainly comes across as very arrogant in his approach. He is super confident in the way that he conducts himself. And that wasn't the early days Moodley. The early days Moodley seemed to be far more withdrawn. So he's really found a new level of confidence and arrogance, in my opinion. I think that he's changed, but I don't believe changed for the better. I believe that there's a new characteristic that has manifested itself.
Maybe prison hardened him.
Apology, if I can. Yeah, I think it has, and I think he's worked the system, and for his, he did give us an apology, but it was an empty apology. It wasn't heartfelt. He gives us part of the introduction was that they've been taught through the process as to how to go about making an apology. Where does that come from? Surely apologies are heartfelt and should be meaningful. So that was an empty apology. It was nowhere near what we would have thought would have been appropriate. I'm not sure that we would have accepted in fairness, but it certainly was hollow.
Just lastly and very quickly, Mr. Matthews, last week, there's been a story about a certain Thabo Bester who was able to escape prison almost over a year later. Only now do we see the wheels starting to turn in terms of the public being aware that there's a serial rapist and murderer back in our streets without any clearance. Does that, as a person who has a daughter who fell victim to a crime such as murder, did that make you, put some concern with your family?
Absolutely. I think it's a huge concern. I think there are a lot of Besters in the prison population, and I think probably more than we realize. And I think some of these inmates live a life beyond what one would have thought prison brought with it. And I'm not so sure that there shouldn't be lifestyle audits in terms of what's happening inside there. For Bester to have conducted a business to the extent that he has, how could that have not gone noticed? And who else was involved? And how many more Besters are in there? And I have lots of open questions in that area. And the authorities need to get their minds around it.
I mean, you can imagine the family of the victims and the victims themselves and how they feel with him being out. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Matthews. I appreciate your time. That was Rob Matthews, Lee Matthews' father. He's giving a family response to Donovan Moodley's latest bid for freedom.